Labour has begun its general election campaign, perhaps 5 or 6 months early, with the launch today of 6 promises about what a Keir Starmer government would do first. Labour has been across the media all day, but a lot of people will still be asking themselves, OK, fair dues, but really, how much should I bother my head with all of this? Well, I have a few small thoughts about what we have really learned today, and one bigger one. The small thoughts start with the fact that looking at the presentation, Labour has decided that this will be a presidential election, Starmer against Sunak. They've put him jacket off, sleeves rolled up, absolutely front and central. And today, candidly, he did well in selling himself as Mr. Responsible, Mr. Sensible, Mr. Determined, and briefly, more than we usually hear, Mr. Passionate.
I want every child, whatever their background, to think that success belongs to them, that they don't have to change who they are to get on. And this Labour Party will fight every day, to give those children a future which is fit for them.
Second thing, after all the attacks on Angela Rayner, Labour has clearly decided that she is a huge electoral asset, reaching places other Labour people can't. I have been watching for the slightest sign of Starmer distancing himself from Rayner, but she was virtually glued to his shoulder. Good call, I think. Finally, and let me break this gently to my Labour listeners, there is not a general election happening any time soon. Clearly the party is so frustrated, so impatient, they have started it anyway. Now this might, in time, begin to feel a little irritating. Quite quickly, people will get bored. But let us now turn to the core, the essence of all this today. If you skim these promises, as most people will, driving past billboards or scrolling online or whatever, you will get the following impression. Economic security, cut waiting times, border controls, crack down on antisocial behaviour, new teachers. Fair enough, very reassuring. But question, how different is that list from the priorities Rishi Sunak also bangs on about? I think this is shaping up to be an election clustered around quite a narrow agenda, in which the biggest question is, who delivers better? Not the what, but the how. And this takes me to the headline over the Labour offer, My First Steps for Change, to which the obvious follow-up question is, steps to where? What's it all for? What is the big vision of a different Labour that different Labour Britain that Keir Starmer wants for us? You heard some of that briefly in that clip I played you earlier. Now, there are the 5 missions, of course, but people don't read missions. I thought back to my conversation with Gordon Brown yesterday and his smouldering emotional commitment to ending child poverty.
I'm seeing children going to school ill-clad and hungry. I'm seeing families that are having to choose between heating, eating and keeping clean. I meet mothers who are having to queue up at food banks because even after a full week's work, they can't earn enough to make ends meet. I'm visiting homes without heating, seeing bedrooms without beds. I'm seeing kitchens without kitchen utensils. We're seeing floors without floor covering. There is a degree of poverty that I really thought I would never see again in my lifetime.
That's more the kind of thing that I'm thinking about, a bigger purpose, the vision of a different kind of country. I'm thinking about tone of voice. Take another example, our stinking, dangerous rivers and beaches and Chris Packham in the New Forest again only yesterday.
It's not just the dead fish, it's not just the cryptosporidium, it's not just the anglers, the sailors, the surfers, the swimmers, the kayakers that are impacted by this. It's actually all of our mental health. We should have a right to water and the ability to enjoy that, and certainly for our families to enjoy it. We should not be frightened of fresh water in the UK. It's an absolute disgrace.
You see, among the many things that drive real change in politics, I think, is that little throb of the voice that you heard there, which signifies quiet rage. I've been wondering about many of the things that will be in a Labour manifesto, but which are not in these first steps priorities, because you see, not all priorities are equal. Some priorities are more priority than other priorities. Workers' rights, more house building, welfare reform. Now, Labour says that this, in the end, is a campaigning tool. It's not the whole deal. And I get that. But I think the next thing Keir Starmer must do is give us more of what we got only a brief flash of this morning, a big, emotionally grounded explanation of what Britain would feel like after a few years of him leading it. And a bit more, perhaps, if it's not asking too much, of the anger that so many voters feel about the way things are right now. Our political editor, Natasha Clark, was at the big launch today. And Natasha, to start with, just give me a sense of what it was like.
It was very presidential. I agree with you there, Andrew. Keir Starmer centre stage. His shadow cabinet surrounded him. On the background of that, they'd all been told to wear a bit of red, so you could nod to that in the background. They had their serious faces on. The expressions. It seemed like they were trying to portray this vision that we are ready for government, and I think they did just about pull that off. You say Keir Starmer had his sleeves rolled up. He had that sort of, tie off, ready for action sort of stance. So it was a very powerful bit of theatre today. He came off stage to Whitney Houston's Step by Step, which was a very apt metaphor, I think, for what the Labour Party were trying to do today, to basically say to the voters, we are on that path to power. We have some more of a plan. This pledge card, which is what Keir Starmer wants you to take away from today, that sort of Tony Blair-esque 6 pledges for those steps to power. That's what Labour want you to take away from today. They've got a plan and they're ready for it.
And they'd all got themselves down to perfectly. This is the kind of place that, it's pretty impoverished, I think, down there. But it's the kind of place which has been Tory for a long time and Labour really need to take back.
Yes, absolutely. This is the kind of place that they need to be winning if they're going to win the next general election. And yes, personally, quite a deprived part of the world. We were on an industrial estate, XL bullies, muzzled, might I add, walking by as we, just after the speech, as we spoke. But look, I think Sir Keir Starmer looked pretty calm. He was pretty cool and collected, I'd say. He laughed off questions that he was similar to Tony Blair, which is exactly, I think, what he wanted us to think with this pledge card. He also laughed off suggestions when we suggested that actually some of these pledges are quite similar to what Rishi Sunak and the Tories are already doing. But there was also a lot of emotional moments there, which I think very much made it feel like a really big American-style campaign launch, a presidential one, like you said. There was a really touching moment when a man who was dying of cancer, Nathaniel Jai, took to the stage and explained why he thought the Tory waiting lists were the reason why that he did not catch his cancer early enough, and some very powerful speeches from some other young people as well, which really, I think, got the Labour shadow cabinet really into their element, and they started to realise this is what they think they're fighting for.
It does really feel like the beginning of an election campaign, but as I keep saying, we might have another 6 months of this anyway. Thank you very much indeed, Natasha. Let's hear from the party itself. Alison McGovern is the acting Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, and we, of course, spoke about those first steps. I really wanted to know first steps to where?
To a country that is able to achieve more, where our children have better hope and chance and opportunity, where people have much better quality of life, where they've got better well-being, where they're healthier. And I say those things because I think there are big fractures in our country now. It's not just that the economy hasn't really grown very much and people's wages haven't really grown very much, important though those things are. It's that we are a sicker country than we were before 14 years of Tory government. Pandemic had a big impact, but there was problems before that. And we really want people to have a better economy that they can rely on, and also that much better quality of life.
Because you mentioned children there, and Keir Starmer, in his speech, the most emotional bit of it today was about children with poor life chances. And I spoke to Gordon Brown, who I know you worked for personally, who was really passionate early on about child poverty, which is a terrible, terrible scourge in this country. And yet, I understand why, but child poverty isn't even mentioned in the 6 pledges. And a lot of people are wondering to themselves how much real social conscience, how much fire in the belly a Labour government will have.
I think it will have huge fire in the belly. And as you said, Keir has spoken, actually, even when we launched our opportunity mission, and Keir spoke about his own background, growing up working class, what that means, his sense of the need for children to be able to break the mould and do, much better than their parents. I listened to Gordon speak about child poverty, and I know that he sees what a lot of people in this country see, which is a massive growth industry in food banks and people who are working incredibly hard for their poverty.
Yes,
and
it's
that
people in work, not people out of work.
That's right. And that is really unfair. People doing the right thing who are then not bringing enough money home in their pay packet to be able to afford the basic necessities of life. That is not fair.
Now, Gordon is a very loyal Labour Party guy and has tried very hard not to cause any trouble. But on child poverty, he has a plan, inevitably being Gordon. He has a plan and a package which does not involve more public spending because it's about how the Bank of England treats money with commercial banks and so on. I assume and hope that the Labour Party will look at Gordon's plan and take it seriously.
I listen to all of the things that Gordon says, and Gordon's plan he's put forward for Jeremy Hunt, as I understand it, there will be another budget or a fiscal event in the autumn, and that's where Gordon's plan is directed. We want to have an overarching plan on child poverty where we have that cross-government approach, where we make sure that children are doing better at school, make sure that their parents are progressing in work so that their wages do go up over time. And we want to do things like have breakfast clubs in schools. And that is partly because that will help the children themselves, be ready to learn. But it's also to give their parents choices so that their parents can say, yes, I can take that job that starts at 9 o'clock in the morning because I can take my child to breakfast club. My kid will be
looked after.
Yeah, it's about getting everybody a better chance.
Alison, what do you think about the two-child cap, which seems to be a very, very big part of what is driving a lot of families in this country into extreme poverty?
I really can't stand it, and we voted against it. We have to be really clear about what we can afford, and I'm not going to make unfunded spending commitments.
But you hate it.
But you can see the damage that it's done all around us. That's why we've got our overarching plan on child poverty. And as Keir said today when he launched our first steps, child poverty will be a huge part of what the next Labour government takes on.
Let's talk about the next steps, because these are first steps, and quite clearly you've had to choose among all the priorities. These are more priority than some of the other priorities, as it were, but there's nothing about house building, there's nothing about workers' rights. At what point will voters, still a little bit suspicious, because they are of all politicians, a little bit sceptical, will get more detail about actually what Labour's going to do?
Well, I think it's because people are sceptical, and also because people have sort of had the hope beaten out of them, that we've set out what our first steps are. So whether it is making sure we've got that grounding of economic stability, learning the lessons of the Liz Truss short era, we want to make sure we've got that grounding. And the other points on public services, the first step on appointments in the NHS and on teachers, it's about that down payment on reform and the big change that we want to see. So the reason why we've set them out in this way is to just indicate to people where we're going. We've already had the missions, which have captured the overall challenge in our country and the direction of travel. And we know that we'll also have a manifesto at the time of the general election. And if only Rishi Sunak would get on with it and call the general election, we could get on with doing our manifesto.
This frustration is kind of crackling and rippling all the way through the Labour Party. But let me ask you a political question about that, because in many respects, what happened today looked and felt exactly like the opening of a traditional general election campaign. This is how they begin. I've been through quite a lot of them. And yet there might be another 6 months. Is there not a danger that by saying this kind of thing so early, you're just going to lose the attention of voters, distracted people over the next 6 months?
Well, I think that people want to have the general election as well. So I think saying what our first steps will be is a really good way of helping people, understand what a Labour government could offer them. Not that Rishi Sunak is going to take my advice, but if he were going to listen, I would say, he's only frustrating people. Get on with it. I think, I'm sure the Tories are hoping that there's going to be some magic from the Bank of England or the economy is going to turn round and it will, help them out. But I think people are just getting frustrated and they want to get on with it.
And would you accept that if you look through a lot of the things that have been announced today or talked about today, there are actually things the Conservative Party would agree about in principle when it comes to borders, when it comes to economic stability, and when it comes to more doctors and nurses and so forth? The Conservatives agree. So this is not really necessarily about big direction of travel. This is about delivery.
Well, like the national minimum wage, I always live in hope that Labour policies will be so good that Conservative governments won't change them. So I hope that we can show really what a fantastic NHS looks like. I really hope that when we reform our schools, change the curriculum, get more teachers in, see children doing better, Tories will say, you were right. I live in hope of that.